few years ago, I was doing doctoral work in a PhD program in the area of anthropology, or what you might call theological anthropology, particularly what did the scriptures say about being human. And during that time, a family reached out to me, a wonderful family whose eldest daughter, they had 4 kids, their eldest daughter, a junior in high school at the time, had announced that though biologically female, she felt she was a man and wanted to transition. And this was a Christian family, and they didn't know what to do. And they got in touch with me. I also was a pastor at the time and asked if I'd spend some time with their daughter. And for about a year, I met with their daughter monthly. And at the time, she was binding her chest and exploring some masculine forms of gender. And I tried to be as respectful as I could when we met together. And she knew I was coming over as a Christian. And she considered herself a Christian as well. And she was young, but she was very, very convinced. In her words, the way she explained this to me was that she believed in God, but she felt that though she had been born in a female body, she felt that God had made her to be a man, and that her journey in life was going to require a quest of becoming that man. And I would often talk to the mom and dad after spending time with her. We'd study scripture, and I'd have a drive back to my campus where I was in graduate school. And I would find myself asking, with deep sympathy, I cared about this person, but how did we get here? How did we even get to a point where someone would think that their body wasn't essential to their identity, and that their body wasn't who they were? That you could separate a person up between their body and some sort of nebulous inner sense of identity. I thought, how did we get here? It led me on a quest to try to see what are the deep questions or subterranean ideas underlying today's gender movement. And it's crucial we see these. And one way to think about this is like this. Maybe you're sitting inside a room right now. The room you're in has walls, and behind those walls is framing. Now, you haven't thought about the framing in that room. You can't even see it. But the framing in that room, behind those walls, is what gives the room you're in its structure and stability, even though you can't see it. Well, movements, like today's gender movement, there's framing behind the walls. And this comes in the form of ideas or assumptions that are made about reality, fundamental beliefs that often lie out of sight in conversations. But these beliefs, they're the structure, they're the framing that give the modern gender movement its current stability and success. And I want to suggest there's 3. There's 3 core beliefs that are behind the walls that we need to understand if we're going to help our friends think about the gender movement biblically. The first belief has to do with identity. Who am I? How do you answer the question, who am I? The second core belief has to do with the body, embodiment. What does the body have to do with gender? And the third core belief has to do with pain, or you might say it has to do with pathways out of pain towards wholeness. What is the right pathway out of my pain towards wholeness? The gender movement sets forth a pathway called transitioning. And you've got to ask the question, is that the right pathway out of my pain? It's a belief that assumes you got to change the outside to heal the inside. Those are 3 core beliefs. I want to take a moment here and drill into the first belief. It has to do with identity. Traditionally, our identity was by and large something that was a given. It was received. It wasn't self-manufactured or self-made. It was determined by your family of origin, your nationality, your biological sex, your religion, perhaps your occupation. But identity, these matters, who am I, they were largely givens. This is how the world's been for most of its history. Today, however, it's completely flipped. Today, identity is not given, it's self-made. Identity is a do-it-yourself project, and it's rooted in self-discovery and self-expression. And so young people, especially now, are put in the highly, really fraught and highly pressurized situation of having to look inside themselves and figure out who they are. Where traditionally it would be, you would hope, a loving and stable voice from without that would be helping them answer that question. And so identity today has become a do-it-yourself project rooted in self-expression and self-determination. So we've got to simply ask, and here's what I want to do. I want to take this first core idea, this part of the framing, if you will, that holds up the gender movement. I want to take this first core idea that essentially it's this. This is the transgender. This is one of its root ideas. Identity is self-made. Identity is man-made. Identity is a do-it-yourself project. I just want to ask, is that biblical? Does the Bible address the question, who am I, differently? And I want to show you that it does. So how would you even answer how the Bible talks about identity? Well, one thing to do would be to go back to the creation account. And that's what I want to do with you. When I walk with people, which I've done often, who are exploring questions of identity and gender, we often go back to Genesis. So let's just turn there in a moment. Let's take a look here. So Genesis 1, it's the first page of the Bible if you're following along. Genesis 1 is the account of creation. And I'm not going to read it word for word, but I just want you to notice who the actor is that's doing the acting. And so you can see this if you just go through, you have God said, God made, God separated, God called, God set, God created. Again and again, the emphasis is, you can't miss it. In the creation of the world, which culminates in human beings, which we'll see in a moment, in the creation of the world, there is one actor, God, and there is one author, God. So creation, whatever else it may be, it has an architect and design, and that's God. So what it is inherently is going to be determined by its maker. Now, if you notice, where the creation account kind of comes to its crescendo is in Genesis 1, 26 and 27 with the creation of humankind. And you hear, I want to read this for you, in the creation of humankind, I want you to notice how you hear the verb created used 3 times. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. The word created is used 3 times. And in Hebrew, one way to emphasize something, because they couldn't bold things back then or underline them, a way to emphasize things was with repetition. So what's being emphasized in the creation of humankind as male and female? What's being emphasized is that we are creatures with a creator. Whatever else a human being is, they are not their own creator. We're a creature with a creator. And right tucked into that verse is the reality that God makes some male and some female. Well, what does this tell us about identity? It tells us this, first and foremost. Human identity, who we are, is God-given, not man-made. Let me say that again. This is crucial for understanding the scriptural view of reality versus the cultural view. Human identity is God-given, not man-made. And you can hear in Genesis 1, 27 that this includes our gender. He created them male and female. Now let me just park on this for a second and point out a few other things. With the creation of humankind and with God giving us our identity, you'll notice that we were created in his image. And later in verse 31 of Genesis 1, God says, he looks at everything he's made and he says, behold, it was very good. So this means that whatever your identity is that God has given you, even if it's painful in ways, because we're in a fallen world, we break in all types of ways. Even if it feels painful in the moment, ultimately your identity, because everything God made is very good, he said, discovering your identity as given to you by God is the unwrapping of a very good gift. And the fact that you're made in his image means that your value is not rooted in how you perform in life. It's not rooted in your ethnicity. It's not even rooted in whether you're male or female. Your value is rooted in the fact that you're in his image and you were made by him. And here's the real payoff with this. The modern view of identity, and I work with a lot of young people. I'm a pastor of a church. The modern view of identity, which is a do-it-yourself project, which means I look within inside and I determine who I am and I express who I am, it's inherently unstable. It's not a stable thing. And this is because our voice is not strong enough to determine who we are. I mean, you just look around, just notice how people act. Notice how desperate they are for a word from a parent or a word from a teacher or a word from a coach that speaks to them a reality that they're good and they're worthwhile. They need to hear it from without for it to matter. C.S. Lewis called this the divine accolade, that there's this need of all inferiors or all pupils to hear from the superior or the teacher, well done. And to be created in the image of God means that your maker speaks over you, your identity. And this means it's inherently stable. It also means something else. To be made in the image of God, and this is all related to identity, to be made in the image of God, if you read along in Genesis 5:1, Adam and Eve have a son. And they have this son, and it said, listen, this is Genesis 5, verse 3. When Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, and named him Seth. Just notice this. This is interesting. The next time image and likeness comes up in Genesis 5:3, it's referring to Adam and Eve having Seth, and they're saying, we now have begot a son in our image and likeness. What does this mean? It means when God says in Genesis 1:27 that you're made in his image, it's a word of sonship. Your identity is rooted in the fact that you are God's daughter or his son. That is absolutely crucial for every human being to know if they are going to have a healthy view of themselves and a stable identity. So, the Christian scriptures have a very different way of approaching the question of identity than does the gender movement. The gender movement says identity is a self-made, do-it-yourself project, which means identity is inherently unstable. The Bible says your maker, who wove you together in your mother's womb, who thought of you before you were ever made you, and that he said it was very good, and he speaks over you, my son or my daughter. That, my friend, is a vision for identity.